My name is Patricia Chen, and for 37 years I kept the books that held my family's restaurant empire together. I was the invisible architect behind Golden Lotus, watching numbers dance across ledgers while my brothers took credit for every success. They called me the calculator, never with affection, always with dismissal. But calculators remember everything. They keep perfect records. And when the time came, those records became the evidence that brought an empire of lies crashing down. This is the story of how silence became my greatest weapon, how patience outlasted arrogance, and how the ledgers I kept so carefully became the testimony that no lawyer could refute. I grew up in the cramped apartment above our first Golden Lotus restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. The smell of ginger, garlic, and sizzling oil was the backdrop of my childhood, comforting and inescapable. My parents, immigrants from Guangdong province, had poured everything into that small restaurant. My father cooked, my mother served, and I, from the age of 8, sat at a corner table doing my homework while keeping one eye on the cash register. My brothers, Michael and Stephen, were 5 and 7 years older than me. They were the golden sons, literally and figuratively. Michael, the eldest, was groomed to take over the business. Stephen was sent to business school at UC Berkeley. Both were tall, charismatic, fluent in the language of American success. I was the afterthought, the daughter, the one who would marry well and bring honor to the family that way. But I loved numbers. I loved the way they told stories that words couldn't hide. By the time I was 12, I was reconciling the daily receipts. By 15, I was managing payroll for our growing staff. By 18, when my parents opened their second location, I was doing the books for both restaurants. My father would pat my head absently. "Good girl, Patricia. You help family." My mother would smile. "So smart with numbers. Good wife material." Neither of them ever asked if I wanted to go to college. Michael had his MBA. Stephen had his business degree. I had my adding machine and the same corner table, now in a larger apartment above the second restaurant. I told myself I didn't mind. Family came first. That's what good Chinese daughters did. I was lying to myself, of course, but I got very good at it. The restaurants thrived. My father's recipes were legendary. Authentic Cantonese cuisine that reminded homesick immigrants of their villages while delighting American palates with flavors they'd never experienced. My mother's warm hospitality made everyone feel like family, and my numbers kept everything running smoothly. By the time I was 25, we had 4 locations. Michael ran operations. Stephen handled marketing and expansion. I managed all the finances, purchasing, payroll, taxes, licenses, and regulatory compliance for every location. I worked 16-hour days. I learned QuickBooks, then upgraded us to more sophisticated accounting software. I developed relationships with our suppliers, negotiating better rates. I created systems for inventory management that reduced waste by 18%. I found tax advantages that saved us thousands annually. "Patricia is so valuable," my father would tell visitors, usually in Cantonese, as if I couldn't understand. "She works for family. No salary needed like outside accountant. Very loyal." I received a small allowance, enough for modest clothes and occasional movies. I lived at home, ate family meals, and had no expenses, so I told myself it was fair. My brothers, meanwhile, drew substantial salaries. Michael drove a BMW. Stephen bought a condo in Pacific Heights. I took the bus and lived in the same small room I'd had since childhood, now decorated with filing cabinets full of meticulously organized records. When I turned 28, my mother started introducing me to sons of family friends. Nice boys with good jobs. I went on awkward dinners where they talked about their work while I calculated percentages of our month-over-month growth in my head. None of them interested me, or perhaps I couldn't imagine leaving my ledgers behind. They were the only place I felt competent, necessary, seen. The real transformation came when I was 32. Michael had been networking with commercial real estate developers and came home one night with ambitious eyes and expensive scotch on his breath. "We're thinking too small," he announced at Sunday family dinner. "4 restaurants? That's thinking like immigrants. We need to think like Americans. Scale, franchising, real wealth." My father, now in his 60s, looked uncertain. "We have good business." "Steady," Stephen added, using the Cantonese term for father that always made him sound more respectful than he was. "We could have 20 locations, 30. We could be the next Panda Express." Seriously. I watched the numbers in my head. Expansion required capital, significant capital. Seriously. We'd need at least 2 million for the kind of growth you're describing. I said quietly, "Where would that come from?" That's 3 pairs of male eyes turned toward me with identical expressions of irritation at the interruption. "That's banks, obviously," Michael said dismissively. "Stephen and I have been talking to commercial lenders. With our current assets and revenue, we can secure the loans." "That's the interest rates," I began, "are manageable," Stephen cut me off. "Patricia, we appreciate your help with the day-to-day bookkeeping, but Michael and I understand high-level finance. This is business school stuff." I wanted to argue. I wanted to point out that I'd been managing our day-to-day bookkeeping for 20 years, that I understood our cash flow better than anyone, that rapid expansion could destroy everything we'd built if we weren't careful. Instead, I nodded and returned to my egg noodles. My mother patted my hand. "Let your brothers handle big decisions. You're so good at the detail work." Detail work. As if keeping 4 restaurants financially solvent was comparable to organizing a sock drawer. But I stayed silent. I always stayed silent. And that was my first mistake. Or perhaps my last one, depending on how you look at it. The expansion happened fast. Too fast. Within 18 months, we went from 4 restaurants to 12. Michael and Stephen were drunk on growth, on the thrill of seeing the Golden Lotus name spread across the Bay Area. I worked 20-hour days, keeping up with the financial complexity. 12 locations meant 12 sets of books, 12 payrolls, 12 inventories, 12 sets of regulatory requirements. I hired 2 assistants to help, but I personally reviewed every transaction, every invoice, every deposit. That's when I started noticing the irregularities. Small things at first. Invoices from suppliers I didn't recognize. Equipment purchases that seemed expensive. Marketing costs that didn't align with any campaigns I knew about. I brought them to Michael's attention one Sunday. "I'm seeing some expenses I don't understand. Can you explain these?" He barely glanced at the printouts I'd prepared. "Those are for the new locations. You wouldn't understand the operational needs." "But this is $40,000 to a company called Bay Area Restaurant Consulting. What services did they provide?" "Strategic planning. Patricia, I don't have time to explain every business decision to you. Just process the payments." Something in his tone made me stop asking questions out loud. But I didn't stop investigating. I created a separate file, a shadow ledger of sorts. Every questionable expense went into it, meticulously documented with dates, amounts, and my notes about why it seemed irregular. I requested copies of contracts, saved email chains, and made discreet calls to suppliers. What I discovered made my hands shake as I typed my notes. Bay Area Restaurant Consulting was owned by Michael's college roommate. They provided no actual services. It was a shell company designed to funnel money out of Golden Lotus into Michael's pocket. Stephen had created similar arrangements. Marketing expenses paid to his girlfriend's design firm for work that was never delivered. Equipment purchases from a supplier that gave Stephen kickbacks on every order. Together, my brothers were embezzling approximately $60,000 monthly from our family business. I sat in my small room, surrounded by filing cabinets full of evidence, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. They were thieves. They were stealing from our parents, from our employees, from the family dream. And they assumed I was too stupid or too docile to notice. I didn't confront them. I'd learned enough about my brothers to know that direct confrontation would accomplish nothing. They'd deny it, explain it away, and probably find a way to remove me from the finances entirely. Instead, I became more meticulous. Every questionable transaction was documented with mathematical precision. I created backup files stored in 3 separate locations: my personal laptop, a cloud service, and a safety deposit box at a bank my family didn't use. I also started recording conversations. California is a 2-party consent state for recording, but I wasn't planning to use these recordings in court. I just needed them for my own clarity, to confirm I wasn't imagining things. The old man's never gonna notice. I heard Michael tell Stephen one day when they thought I was at our Richmond location. I'd come back early and stood frozen in the hallway outside the office. He barely understands the finances. He just sees deposits and thinks everything's fine. And Patricia? Stephen's voice held amusement. Patricia does what she's told. She's been doing what she's told her whole life. She's not going to suddenly grow a backbone now. They laughed. The sound carved itself into my memory. I walked into the office with my usual quiet expression. I need signatures on these tax documents. They signed without reading them, still chuckling about something. I smiled my small, forgettable smile and returned to my corner desk. But inside, I was calculating, planning, becoming someone they'd never expected. My father's health began declining when I was 35. Diabetes, high blood pressure, the stress of running an expanding business taking its toll. He started spending less time at the restaurants, trusting Michael and Stephen to handle operations. My mother, devoted as always, focused on caring for him. She'd spent 40 years serving others in the restaurant. Now, she wanted to serve her husband in his illness. Patricia will make sure the money side is good, she told him. She's so reliable. I held my father's hand and promised him everything was fine. I hated lying to him, but what could I say? That his golden sons were thieves? That the empire he'd built was being hollowed out from the inside? He was sick, fragile. The truth would have destroyed him, so I kept my silence and my records, and waited. The brothers grew bolder. With our parents less involved, their embezzlement increased. I documented $75,000 one month, $90,000 the next. They started talking about pushing our parents into retirement. We need them to sign over controlling interest. Michael said at a management meeting I was excluded from, but heard about through a sympathetic assistant manager. The business has outgrown their immigrant mentality. We need modern leadership. Modern leadership. That's what they called stealing. I prepared 3 sets of documents that month. One was the official financial report showing healthy profits. One was the real report showing our actual financial state after the embezzlement. And one was a comprehensive analysis of every fraudulent transaction going back 4 years. The gap between the official and real reports was staggering. My brothers had stolen over $2 million from Golden Lotus. That number sat in my spreadsheet like an indictment. $2 million. My parents' life savings, the employees' jobs, the family legacy. All slowly being drained away by the sons my parents had sacrificed everything to elevate. The pressure to push our parents out intensified. Michael scheduled a family meeting when I was 36. He'd even hired a lawyer, someone who specialized in family business transitions. We gathered in the office above the original restaurant. My father looked tired. My mother held his hand. My brothers wore expensive suits and expressions of practiced concern. "Ba, ma," Michael began in Cantonese. "Stephen and I have been thinking about your retirement. You've worked so hard for so many years. You deserve rest." "The restaurants," my father started. "Will be fine," Stephen assured him. "Better than fine. Michael and I have the education and experience to take Golden Lotus to the next level. But we need clear authority to make decisions without constantly getting approval." The lawyer opened his briefcase. "I've prepared documents that would transfer 70% ownership to your sons, while maintaining 30% for you and your wife. You'd still receive substantial distributions. But your sons would have the controlling vote on all business decisions. I watched my parents' faces. They looked confused, uncertain. What about Patricia? My mother asked softly. She works so hard. Michael's smile was magnanimous. Patricia would continue doing the bookkeeping, of course. She's family. We take care of family. But no ownership? My voice surprised even me. I'd been silent so long. You're not involved in operations or strategy, Stephen said, as if explaining to a child. Ownership should reflect actual contribution to the business's success. My contribution? 28 years of unpaid labor. 28 years of keeping their empire from collapsing under mismanagement and fraud. How much time do we have to think about this? My father asked. Take a week, Michael said generously. But Ba, you look tired. Don't you want to rest? Enjoy your retirement? Trust us to handle things? I saw the manipulation clearly. Make our father feel old, tired, incompetent. Make him think his immigrant ways were holding the business back. After they left, I found my mother in the small apartment kitchen, crying quietly. What's wrong, Ma? I asked. Your father built this with his hands, she whispered in Cantonese. His recipes, his dreams. Now your brothers want him to just sign it away. He doesn't have to sign anything, I said softly. But they're right. He's tired, sick. Maybe he should retire. Retiring doesn't mean giving up ownership. She looked at me with tired eyes. You don't understand business, Patricia. You're good with numbers, but business is different. I almost laughed. I almost showed her the files, the evidence, the truth. But she wasn't ready. Neither was my father. So I waited and I planned. I spent the week before my parents were supposed to sign preparing the most comprehensive financial analysis of my career. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I just compiled, calculated, and cross-referenced until I had an undeniable portrait of systematic theft. 3 days before the signing, I requested a private meeting with my parents. I need to show you something, I said, about the restaurant's finances. My father looked uncomfortable. Patricia, your brothers explained everything. Please, I interrupted. Just look at these numbers. I spread the documents across their kitchen table. The official reports Michael had shown them. My real reports. The gap analysis. The evidence of fraud. My father's face went gray as he absorbed the information. My mother's hand went to her mouth. This can't be right, my father said in Cantonese. Your brothers wouldn't... Look at the dates, the amounts, the shell companies. I walked him through it methodically. This supplier doesn't exist. This consultant is Michael's friend who does nothing. These marketing expenses go to Stephen's girlfriend for imaginary work. $2 million, my mother whispered. 2.3 million, I corrected. Over 4 years, and it's accelerating. My father aged 10 years in that moment. The sons he'd sacrificed everything for had betrayed him in the most fundamental way. What do we do? His voice cracked. This was the moment I'd been preparing for. We call the police, we press charges, we take back control of the company and remove them from all financial access. They're our sons, my mother said. Family. They're thieves. I replied, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. They're stealing from you, from our employees, from everything you built. And they were planning to trick you into giving them control so they could continue stealing until there was nothing left. My father looked at the papers spread across the table. The evidence of his son's crimes documented in my careful handwriting, my precise calculations. You knew, he said slowly. You knew, and you said nothing. I knew and I gathered proof, I corrected. Accusations without evidence accomplish nothing. But this, I gestured to the documents, this is undeniable. He studied me as if seeing me for the first time. The invisible daughter. The calculator. The reliable one. The one who'd been protecting the family in silence for years. My parents didn't call the police. Not immediately. They wanted to confront my brothers first, to give them a chance to explain. I argued against it. They'll deny everything. They'll say I made mistakes in the bookkeeping. They'll manipulate you again. But my father insisted. They're my sons. I need to hear it from them. So we scheduled a family meeting. Just the 5 of us. No lawyer. No prepared documents for signing. My brothers arrived confident, briefcases in hand, ready to close the deal that would give them control of everything. They froze when they saw the papers spread across the conference table. "What's this?" Michael's voice had an edge of concern. "Sit down," my father said. His voice was cold. I'd never heard him use that tone. They sat. I remained standing, my back to the wall, my comprehensive file in my hands. "Patricia has shown us some concerning financial information," my father continued in English, "about money leaving the business. Money going to companies that don't provide real services. I don't know what she's been telling you," Stephen started, "but Patricia doesn't understand complex business relationships." "I understand theft," I said quietly. "I understand shell companies. I understand kickbacks and embezzlement and fraud." Michael's face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Bay Area Restaurant Consulting," I said, opening my file, "received $468,000 over 3 years for strategic planning services. The company is registered to your college roommate, Tom Patterson. He's a dentist. He's provided exactly 0 hours of consulting. Shall I continue?" The room went silent. "Stephen's girlfriend runs Creative Design Solutions," I continued, my voice steady. "She's been paid $312,000 for marketing materials. I've reviewed every piece of marketing we've used in that time period. She designed exactly none of it. In fact, she told me when I called her pretending to need design work that she'd never actually worked in graphic design." Stephen's face was white. "There's more," I said. "Equipment kickbacks. Inflated supplier invoices where you pocket the difference. Credit card expenses for personal purchases coded as business meetings. Salary payments to people who don't exist. Would you like me to go through all of it? I have documentation for every transaction." "You've been spying on us," Michael hissed. "I've been doing my job," I replied. "Managing the finances, keeping accurate records, following the money. Which is what I've done for 28 years, while you took credit for my work and called it just bookkeeping." My father's hands shook as he held the summary I'd prepared. $2.3 million from your own family. "We were going to pay it back," Stephen tried. "It was like a loan." "Loans require permission," I interrupted. "This is theft. You were stealing from Ma and Ba, from our employees, from the family legacy. You little—" Michael started to stand. "Sit down," my father commanded, and something in his voice made Michael obey. "You were going to make us sign over the business, while you were robbing us blind." The truth hung in the air, undeniable and ugly. "What happens now?" Stephen asked, his voice small. My father looked at me. "Patricia, you've thought about this more than us. What happens now?" It was the first time he'd ever asked my opinion on something important. I took a breath. "We have 3 options. 1, we press charges. With this much documentation, the district attorney would have an easy case. You'd both likely face prison time." My mother made a small sound of distress. 2, I continued. "We let it go. You stay in the business, continue having access to finances, and probably continue stealing because you've gotten away with it so far. Or 3, my father's eyes never left my face. 3, you both resign immediately from all positions at Golden Lotus. You sign documentation admitting to the theft. You relinquish any ownership stake in the company. You agree to repayment terms for the full amount stolen. And if you ever breathe a word against this family or this business, or if you miss a single payment, I hand all of this evidence to the authorities." "That's insane," Michael said. "We built this business." "Da and Ma built this business," I corrected. "You were handed positions of privilege and you abused them. You're lucky I'm giving you an option that doesn't involve prison." "What about you?" Stephen's voice was bitter. "I suppose you're positioning yourself to take over?" "I'm positioning myself to do exactly what I've been doing for 28 years, I said. "Keeping this family business alive despite your best efforts to destroy it." My father stood slowly. He walked to where my brothers sat and looked down at them. When he spoke, it was in Cantonese, the language of his disappointment. "You shamed your mother and me. You shamed your ancestors. You shamed the family name. Patricia is giving you mercy I don't think you deserve. Take it or face the consequences." They took the deal. What choice did they have? The evidence was overwhelming, and I'd been smart enough to involve our family lawyer, not the one Michael had hired, but the one who'd helped my parents through immigration and business setup decades ago. He reviewed everything, confirmed my analysis, and helped draft ironclad documents. Michael and Stephen resigned the next day. They signed confessions, relinquishment of ownership, and repayment agreements that would take them 15 years to complete at significant percentages of their current incomes. I watched them clean out their offices, their expensive suits, looking cheap somehow. They wouldn't meet my eyes. As Michael passed me on his way out, he stopped. "You've been planning this for years, haven't you? Quiet little Patricia." Gathering her evidence. "I've been doing my job," I said simply. "You assumed that made me stupid. That was your mistake." "We'll never forgive you for this," Stephen added. "I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked for honesty. You couldn't provide it, so I provided consequences." They left. I never saw them again, except for the monthly payment receipts that arrived like clockwork, their shame documented in neat accounting entries. Part 11. The reconstruction. The business needed significant restructuring. $2 million in theft had done real damage, compounded by the overexpansion my brothers had pushed. We had 12 locations, but only enough actual capital to sustain 8. I spent 6 months conducting analysis. Which locations were profitable? Which had long-term potential? Which were vanity projects my brothers had opened for prestige rather than business sense? We closed 4 restaurants. It hurt, laying off staff, breaking leases, admitting that we'd grown too fast. But it was necessary. I promoted from within for operations management. One of our best managers, Maria Rodriguez, who'd been working for us for 15 years, became COO. She understood the culture my parents had built and had actual operational expertise. For marketing, I hired a small firm that actually did the work they billed for. Revolutionary concept. That said, and I took the title I'd earned, Chief Financial Officer of Golden Lotus Restaurant Group. Promise. And my mother cried when I had business cards printed. "We should have seen you," she said in Cantonese. "All these years, we should have seen you." And I took the title I'd earned, Chief Financial Officer. That's enough. My father's health improved once the stress of the betrayal eased. He still cooked sometimes, teaching Maria and me his secret techniques. His hands would move through familiar motions while he talked about the village he'd left behind, the dreams he'd carried across the ocean. "I wanted to give my sons everything I didn't have," he said one evening. "Education, opportunity, respect. I think I gave them too much. I forgot to teach them what matters." "You taught me," I said quietly. Hugh looked at me with eyes that had finally learned to see. "I didn't teach you. You taught yourself. Well, I was blind." "You taught me by example," I corrected. "Hard work, integrity, family. I watched you for 37 years. You were teaching me the whole time." He pulled me into a hug that smelled like ginger and garlic and home. It took 3 years to stabilize the business. 3 years of 18-hour days, careful management, strategic decisions. But slowly, Golden Lotus recovered. I restructured our supplier relationships, finding better rates without kickbacks. I implemented new financial controls so no one person could hide theft the way my brothers had. I diversified our menu offerings based on actual customer data rather than assumptions. The 8 remaining locations thrived. Revenue increased. Profit margins improved. Employee satisfaction rose when people were treated fairly and paid properly. I hired a real accountant, a young woman named Jennifer, who'd graduated top of her class but was struggling to find firms that would give her real responsibility. She reminded me of myself, except I made sure she was paid what she was worth and given credit for her work. "Why did you hire me?" she asked one day. "You could have gotten someone with more experience." "Because talent isn't the same as opportunity," I replied. "You have talent. I'm giving you opportunity. What you do with it is up to you, but you'll do it with fair compensation and respect." She became my protege. I taught her everything I knew about restaurant finances, about maintaining integrity in business, about how numbers tell stories that reveal truth. Maria and I formed a partnership built on mutual respect. She handled operations. I handled finances. We consulted each other on decisions. We built something sustainable. My parents gradually transitioned to true retirement. They'd come to the original location for Sunday dinners, greeting old customers like family. They'd sit at the corner table where I'd done my homework decades ago and watch the restaurant run smoothly. "This is what we dreamed of," my mother said one evening. "Family, good food, honest work." "You built it," I reminded her. "I'm just maintaining it." "You saved it," my father corrected, "and improved it. This is better than anything your brothers would have created." On my 40th birthday, I did something radical. I took a vacation, a real one. 2 weeks in Japan exploring food culture and the art of attention to detail. I walked through Tokyo's Tsukiji market, watched master sushi chefs work with reverent precision, ate ramen in tiny shops where the broth had been simmering for generations. I saw how excellence lived in the details, how pride in craft created something meaningful. In Kyoto, I visited temples where monks had been keeping records for centuries. Careful documentation of wisdom, history, lessons learned. My ledgers weren't so different, records of what mattered, truth preserved in careful notation. I came back refreshed, clearer, more certain of my path. I'd spent so many years being invisible, thinking that was my role. But invisibility had been my choice as much as my curse. I'd hidden in the numbers because numbers were safe, predictable, less scary than asserting my own worth. My brothers hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen credit for my work, confidence in my abilities, years of my life where I'd accepted scraps instead of demanding my due. But they hadn't stolen everything. They hadn't stolen my skill, my integrity, my careful documentation of truth. In the end, those were the things that mattered. 2 years after my brothers left, we opened a new location. Not because we had to prove anything, but because we'd found the perfect opportunity. A space in Oakland's Chinatown, a neighborhood that reminded me of where we'd started. I ran the numbers carefully. Revenue projections, cost analysis, risk assessment. We could afford it. More importantly, we could do it right. Maria and I planned every detail. The menu would honor my father's original recipes, while incorporating modern dietary needs. Vegetarian options, gluten-free choices, dishes that reflected our diverse customer base. The space would have an open kitchen, letting customers see the care that went into each dish. Transparency. Nothing hidden. We'd staff it entirely with internal promotions and local hires, paying above minimum wage and offering benefits, treating people as assets rather than expenses. At the grand opening, I stood back and watched my parents cut the ribbon. My father's hands shook slightly. His health wasn't perfect, but he was there, present, proud. A reporter from the local paper approached me. "You're the CFO, right? Patricia Chen? I've heard this business has an interesting history." I tensed. Had someone leaked the story of my brother's theft? I heard, the reporter continued, that you've been running the financial side for decades. That you helped the company recover from overexpansion and are now opening new locations with a focus on sustainable growth and employee welfare. Can you tell me about your philosophy? I relaxed. This I could talk about. Numbers tell stories, I said. The story I want our numbers to tell is about honest work, fairly rewarded. About growth that's sustainable rather than extractive. About family, real family, not just biological relatives, but the family you build through shared purpose and mutual respect. She scribbled notes. That's a beautiful philosophy. How did you develop it? I thought about my brother's betrayal. About decades of being invisible. About ledgers full of evidence and the patience to gather it properly. I learned that what you do in the shadows eventually comes to light, I said carefully. Good work, bad work, it all becomes visible eventually. So I decided to make sure my work could stand up to scrutiny. Well, the article ran with a photo of our family. My parents, Maria, Jennifer, our head chef, and me. Golden Lotus blooms again, how family business rebuilt on foundation of integrity. That piece brings, I think, on there. My brothers weren't mentioned. They'd been erased from the story they'd tried to steal. Of course, they tried to sue. 3 years after they'd signed away everything, Michael and Stephen filed a lawsuit, claiming I'd coerced them, that they'd been under duress, that they deserved their share of a business they'd helped build. Their lawyer was expensive and aggressive. They claimed emotional manipulation, undue influence, that our parents had been turned against them by my lies. I sat in the conference room with our lawyer, Mr. Wong, who'd represented our family for 40 years. He reviewed their complaint with amusement. This will fail, he said simply. You have documentation they signed willingly, multiple witnesses, evidence of actual theft. They're hoping you'll settle to avoid publicity. I said firmly. We're not settling. It could get ugly. Public. Your family business might face scrutiny. Let it, I replied. We have nothing to hide. Unlike them, our books are clean. Our practices are ethical. Scrutiny would only prove that. The lawsuit dragged on for 18 months. My brothers gave depositions where they tried to portray themselves as victims. I'd been vindictive, they claimed. Jealous. I'd fabricated evidence because I wanted to take over. Then came my deposition. I arrived with 16 bankers' boxes of documentation. Miss Chen, their lawyer began, isn't it true that you harbored resentment toward your brothers for years? No, I said calmly. I harbored disappointment. Resentment requires energy I didn't have time for. Second, you admit you spied on them, recorded conversations, built a case against them secretly. Strong. I admit, I kept accurate financial records, which is my job. I documented irregularities, which is my responsibility. I gathered evidence of theft, which is my legal right. Strong. There. You destroyed their careers out of spite. Strong. They destroyed their own careers through theft. I simply documented it. Strong. P. The lawyer tried for hours to rattle me, to make me appear vindictive or emotional. But numbers don't have emotions. Facts don't get flustered. Strong. P. When my turn came, our lawyer walked through every piece of evidence, every fake invoice, every shell company, every kickback. The judge's expression grew darker with each revelation. Your clients, Mr. Wong said, addressing their lawyer, stole $2.3 million from their parents and orchestrated a scheme to steal the entire business through fraudulent transfer of ownership. Ms. Chen prevented this theft and gave them the option to avoid criminal prosecution. They signed documents agreeing to these terms. Now they claim coercion while providing no evidence of it. This lawsuit is frivolous and borders on abuse of process. The judge agreed. Not only did she dismiss the case, she awarded us attorney's fees and sanctions against my brothers for filing a baseless claim. Ms. Chen, the judge said, your documentation is extraordinary. Your brothers are fortunate you chose civil resolution over criminal prosecution. This court finds their lawsuit an attempt to escape consequences of their own criminal behavior. Case dismissed. The lawsuit's dismissal came with unexpected publicity. Business journals picked up the story. Woman saves family empire through forensic accounting. CFO's patient documentation prevents multi-million-dollar theft. I gave a few interviews, uncomfortable with attention, but willing to share lessons learned. What advice would you give to others in similar situations? One journalist asked. Document everything, I said. Keep impeccable records. Don't make accusations you can't prove. And understand that patience isn't passivity. Sometimes waiting for the right moment is the strongest action you can take. Do you regret how things turned out with your brothers? I considered the question carefully. I regret that they chose theft over integrity, but I don't regret protecting my family's legacy. Some people mistake silence for weakness or kindness for stupidity. The lesson they learned is expensive, but maybe they needed to pay that price. Industry organizations started inviting me to speak about financial oversight in family businesses. I talked about internal controls, about the importance of treating every family member's contribution fairly, about how prevention is easier than remedy. At a conference in Chicago, the young woman approached me afterward. My family has a business, she said. I do the bookkeeping. My brothers are... I think they're doing what your brothers did. I don't know what to do. I gave her my card. Start documenting. Everything. Dates, amounts, irregularities. Store records safely in multiple locations. Build an undeniable case. Then decide if you want to try to fix it from inside or if you need outside intervention. But don't ignore it. It doesn't get better on its own. She hugged me, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Everyone says family comes first, but family does come first, I assured her. But real family means protecting each other, not protecting theft. You're being a good family member by trying to save the business. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. My father passed away when I was 43. Peacefully, surrounded by family, in the apartment above the original restaurant where he'd built his American dream. His funeral was massive. Employees from across 3 decades, customers who'd become friends, suppliers who'd respected his integrity, the community he'd fed and employed and uplifted. My brothers didn't come. I had sent them notice, told them they could attend the funeral without drama. They chose absence over reconciliation. Their loss, literally and figuratively. At the reception, person after person shared stories about my father's kindness, how he'd hired people no one else would hire, how he'd extended credit when customers were struggling, how his restaurant had been a gathering place for immigrants finding their footing in a new country. He gave me my first job in America, one elderly man said. I spoke no English. He taught me to cook, treated me like family. He catered my wedding for free, a woman shared, when he found out my parents couldn't afford the restaurant we wanted. He said every bride deserves to celebrate properly. These were the numbers that mattered, the real accounting, not profit and loss, but lives touched, communities built, dignity preserved. In his will, my father left my mother 60% of Golden Lotus. I received 35%. The remaining 5% was divided among long-term employees who'd been with us over 20 years. My brothers got nothing. The will stated explicitly, to my sons Michael and Stephen, you received everything I had to give. What you did with it revealed your character. I leave you nothing because you gave the family nothing but pain. Legal, final, irrevocable. My mother asked if I thought it was too harsh. No, I said, it was honest. Ba never lied in his life. He wasn't going to start in his will. I'd never married, never had children of my own. For years, that had felt like failure. The dutiful daughter who'd given up personal life for family obligation. But I'd built something different. A family of choice. A legacy of integrity. Jennifer, my protege, was promoted to VP of Finance at 45. She managed our expanding operations with the same attention to detail I'd taught her. She mentored other young accountants, passing forward the opportunities she'd received. Maria became CEO when I moved into a chairman role at 48. She'd earned it through years of excellent operational leadership and a deep understanding of what made Golden Lotus special. We expanded to 12 locations again, but this time the right way. Sustainable growth, careful planning, each location profitable before we opened the next. We started a training program for aspiring restaurateurs. People could work with us for 2 years, learning everything from cooking to management to finances. Then we'd help them start their own establishments. Not franchises, but independent restaurants that maintained their own identity. "You're creating competitors," a business consultant told me. "I'm creating community," I corrected. "There's room for everyone who does good work." The world needs more good restaurants, not more consolidated corporate chains. My mother, now in her 80s, still came to Sunday dinners at the original location. She'd sit at that corner table, the one where I'd done my homework and learned to count receipts, and watch the restaurant bustle with life. "Your father would be proud," she told me one evening. "Of what?" I asked. "Of all of it, but especially of how you did it. You could have been bitter, angry. Instead, you protected the family and built something even better." "I learned from him," I said. "He showed me that how you do something matters as much as what you accomplish." She patted my hand, her skin papery and soft. "You were always watching, learning. I wish we'd seen it sooner. You see it now? That's enough." 10 years after my brothers had been forced out, I received an email from Stephen. The subject line read, "An apology if you'll accept it." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Patricia," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I owe you an apology. Multiple apologies, really, for multiple sins. I'm sorry for stealing. I'm sorry for dismissing you. I'm sorry for years of treating you as if your contributions didn't matter. I'm sorry for calling you stupid when you were the smartest person in the family. I'm sorry for the lawsuit, which was a desperate attempt to avoid facing what we'd done. Michael and I aren't close anymore. The guilt destroyed our relationship. He blames you. I blame us. I lost my job last year. The payments to the family, they're killing me financially, but I keep making them because it's the only honorable thing I've done in years. My marriage ended. My wife couldn't respect someone who'd stolen from his own parents. I'm not asking you to make it easier. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. You weren't vindictive. You were just. You gave us a mercy we didn't deserve, and we responded with a lawsuit and bitterness. I hear Golden Lotus is thriving. I'm genuinely glad. You were always the one who actually cared about the business, about the family. We just cared about what it could give us. I hope you're well. I hope you've built a good life. You deserved that more than any of us. Stephen. I read it 3 times, looking for manipulation, hidden angles, requests for leniency. I found none of that, just exhaustion, regret, the weight of consequences finally understood. I wrote back a short reply. "Stephen, I accept your apology, not because it changes anything, but because carrying anger is exhausting, and I'm tired of giving you space in my head. You're right that I gave you both mercy. I did it for Ma and Ba, not for you. They loved you despite everything. That's what parents do. Keep making your payments. Honor your commitment. It's too late to undo what you did, but it's not too late to finish paying your debt. I hope you find peace, real peace, not just the absence of consequences." Patricia. I never heard from him again. The monthly payments continued. Eventually, after 15 years, the debt was paid. I had a small ceremony for it, just me and my mother, now 91 and frail. I showed her the final payment receipt. "It's done," I said. "They paid back everything." She held the paper with shaking hands. "Do you think they learned anything?" she asked. I don't know, I said honestly, but that's not my responsibility. I did my part. The rest is up to them. I retired from active management at 55. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd spent 47 years keeping the family books. I was tired, satisfied, ready for something different. Jennifer took over as CFO. Maria remained CEO. Together, they led Golden Lotus into its next chapter. I remained on the board, providing guidance when asked, but mostly trusting them to continue what we'd built. I traveled, finally saw the world beyond restaurants and ledgers. I took cooking classes in Thailand, studied art history in Italy, hiked mountains in New Zealand. I learned that I was more than my work, more than my usefulness to others. But I never forgot the lessons. On my 60th birthday, a business school invited me to give a lecture. Women in Finance, Breaking Barriers. I almost declined. I'd never been much for public speaking. But then I thought about all those years of silence, of being dismissed, of watching my brothers take credit while I did the work. I accepted. 200 people filled the auditorium. Students, professionals, women who worked in shadows like I had, keeping systems running while others claimed the spotlight. I'm going to tell you about ledgers. I began. Not the exciting topic you were hoping for, I'm sure, but ledgers are stories. They're evidence. They're truth in numerical form. For 28 years, I kept ledgers that no one appreciated. I was the calculator, the bookkeeper, the reliable one. People made assumptions about me based on my silence and my service. Those assumptions were their mistakes, not my limitations. Because while I was being underestimated, I was documenting, learning, building an undeniable case for my own competence and others' malfeasance. When the moment came, I had evidence they couldn't refute. I'm not telling you this to encourage passive-aggressive record-keeping, though good documentation is never wasted. I'm telling you this because silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes waiting for the right moment is the strongest thing you can do. But, and this is crucial, you have to know the difference between strategic patience and learned helplessness, between gathering strength and accepting mistreatment, between building your case and building your cage. I spent years confusing the two. I told myself I was being patient when really I was being afraid. It wasn't until I had undeniable evidence that I found the courage to act. My advice? Don't wait as long as I did. Document, yes. Build your case, absolutely. But also build your confidence. Assert your worth. Demand recognition before you have to prove wrongdoing to get it. The numbers will bear you out if you're good at what you do. Let them speak while you still have the energy to push for change. The applause was overwhelming. Afterwards, dozens of young women approached with questions, stories, requests for advice. I stayed for hours, giving each person the attention I'd craved in my younger years. One woman, maybe 25, waited until everyone else had gone. I'm the only woman on my team, she said. They dismiss everything I say. I keep thinking if I just work harder, do better work, they'll respect me. They won't, I said gently. Not without you demanding it. Good work is necessary, but not sufficient. You need good work and the willingness to advocate for yourself. But I don't want to be difficult. Difficult is subjective, I interrupted. What they call difficult, I call having standards. Start documenting your contributions. When you're in meetings, speak up even if you're scared. Send summary emails that create written records of your ideas. Make them acknowledge you, not just your work. What if it doesn't work? Then you find somewhere that appreciates you. Life's too short to spend it being invisible. She hugged me tightly. Thank you for telling your story, for showing us it's possible. I'm 65 now. My mother passed last year, peacefully, surrounded by family in the apartment where she'd raised us and built her dreams. Her funeral was even larger than my father's. She'd outlived him by 20 years and touched even more lives. Golden Lotus has 18 locations, a training institute, a foundation that provides small business loans to immigrant entrepreneurs. Maria's daughter is being groomed to take over operations eventually. Jennifer's teaching at Berkeley's business school part-time, while still consulting for us. The business my parents built with calloused hands and hope has become something larger, more inclusive, more sustainable. My brothers are both still alive, as far as I know. I don't follow their lives. They paid their debt. Our relationship, such as it was, ended there. I harbor no hatred for them, but no affection either. They're strangers who share my DNA and nothing else. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't kept such meticulous records. If I'd just let them steal, let them manipulate our parents, let them destroy what took decades to build. The restaurants would have failed. Employees would have lost jobs. A family legacy would have died in the wreckage of my brother's greed. But I did keep records. I did gather evidence. I did wait for the right moment and then act decisively. Not because I was brave, not because I was strategic, but because I loved numbers, and numbers don't lie. They tell stories of what really happened, stripped of spin and excuses. In my small apartment, no longer above a restaurant, but in a quiet neighborhood with a garden I actually have time to tend, I keep one memento from those years. It's the first ledger I ever maintained. When I was 12 years old, learning to reconcile receipts at a corner table while my parents worked. The pages are yellowed now. My handwriting childish but careful. Even then, I was precise. Even then, I understood that numbers were truth. I page through it sometimes, remembering that girl. The invisible daughter. The calculator. The one who was supposed to marry well and bring honor through service. She saved an empire by refusing to be invisible, by letting her numbers speak truth. By understanding that ledgers are more than financial documents, they're evidence of what matters. My story isn't about revenge, though many might see it that way. It's about the quiet power of documentation, about patience that's actually strength, about how silence can be strategy if you're also building an undeniable case. I spent 37 years being underestimated. In the end, those years weren't wasted. They were the foundation for everything that came after. Because the people who dismiss you aren't paying attention. And when you're ready, when your evidence is undeniable, their attention doesn't matter anymore. The numbers tell the truth. The ledgers record reality. And sometimes the quietest voice in the room is the one keeping track of everything that matters. My name is Patricia Chen. I kept the books. I saved the family. And I did it by becoming exactly what they called me, the calculator who remembered everything.